how are we doing online? We're okay? Okay. Well, welcome everybody this afternoon to our program and panel called Psychology from Graduate Education to Careers in Psychology. And I usually like to start off my programs and panel with a round of applause. So give yourselves a round of applause. And those of you online as well, round of applause. And I also like to give our panelists a welcoming round of applause. And one of the reasons why I like to start with a round of applause is, boy, have you done a lot of work planning for this for a number of years, thinking about your career paths and coming to events like this and really putting your mind together as you're either in the process of applying or getting ready to apply. So again, this is all to be, it's not always the outcome to get in, but the whole process along the way that we want to reward. Our program today is hybrid. So if you might hear us pause, you might see a couple of the panelists come up and speak here from this direction. But so I want to welcome our panelists that are online as well and joining us from the web. I'm Dr. John Tabor, and I'm one of the career counselors here, as well as educational advisors. And I actually have a background in psychology myself as a PhD in counseling psychology. And so it really is exciting for me because we have a number of trainees at NIH and those of you here from this summer that really have an interest in going into careers in psychology. And psychology is a broad field, very exciting field. And there's a lot of different ways to enter it and enter into the field and a lot of different career paths that you might follow. So the panel today will consist of about the first maybe half hour, if not 20 minutes, half hour. We'll be having our distinguished panelists who I'll have introduce themselves in a moment. Talk a little bit about their careers. I have a few questions for them. We'll answer a few of your questions. And at the end, we will be pausing for you all to have maybe at least the last 20 minutes to half hour to network and talk with them more individually should you have questions. Okay? So again, it's nice to have you. So let's go ahead and get started this morning. Again, we have a great and distinguished panel. I'm very excited to hear that we have so many panelists that joined us this year. So what we'll do is start with the group here in the front. And if you can please introduce yourselves. We have a page behind us that says who you are and who's behind you. But I think when you introduce yourselves, I was thinking about if you can just explain briefly like how you decided on a career in psychology or how you got interested in this area. And then also, and just a little bit about your path here, that, like in terms of your educational path, because each one of you might have come in a little different way. Okay, so why don't we start? And we have some panelists here that are also representing schools that have programs. So at least you can still introduce yourself and at least talk about what you do. If there's something you want to share about that, that's just fine as well. Okay, so why don't we start on the far end down there with Dr. Miriam O'Kine Davis, if you want to go ahead and start and introduce yourself for the group.
Sure, not quite doctor yet.
Not quite doctor yet, okay.
So I am Miriam O'Kine Davies, Assistant Dean of Graduate Student Affairs and Enrollment Management with Howard University's Graduate School. And actually my area of expertise is more in the management field, but org psych is an area that I'm really interested in. So looking at cognitive bias and organizational decision-making around risk. Is kind of my area of research interest, and really excited to hear some questions from students and help answer questions about our programs, both at the graduate school and how to set yourself up for success.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm Alana Morin. I am the Associate Chair of the Clinical Psychology PsyD program at the DC campus of the Chicago School. So my background is in clinical health psychology specifically. I don't think we have time for me to share my entire route to psychology, but I'll try to make it quick. Essentially, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I majored in psychology in undergraduate, in my undergraduate degree, and was interested also in medical school. So after I graduated, I worked for a couple of years with an employee assistance program, actually up the road in Rockville. Then I spent a couple of years doing research at the University of Pennsylvania. I got a public health degree at Hopkins. And then it was while I was there that I discovered the field of health psychology. And for me, that was kind of the perfect merging of my interest in psychology and medicine. I really hadn't known that field existed before. And so I went to graduate school in clinical psychology and I'm so glad that's the route I took because as we'll talk about later, psychology is just an amazing path if you want to have as many options open as possible to you. So I'll stop
Thank
there,
you.
but I'm
Thank you
happy
for-
to answer questions that
Sure.
come up later.
Yes, thank you for that nice introduction. Next.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Terry Domore, and I'm an associate professor and the associate clinical training director at Howard University in the clinical psychology program. I am both a clinical psychologist and forensic psychologist, and I have had a pretty circuitous path towards clinical psychology. But I would say that my interest peaked as a first-year undergrad through a couple of professors that I had. One was a developmental psychologist, and the other was actually a school psychologist who did evaluations for at-risk youth. Our program is pretty diverse at Howard in our clinical psych program, and I'm really excited to talk about any questions that you have for our program. With regard to my specific research, I'll just cap it, but I deal specifically with juvenile delinquency and looking at the root causes for juvenile crime, but mostly related to the psychological factors around juveniles of color and the Black family and the dissolution of the Black family and how that manifests into juvenile delinquency. So thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Juarez. I'm from Stony Brook University. As you can see, my PhD is in genetics, but I am representing a fabulous program that we have at the university in psychology, and it's kind of a multidisciplinary track. We have integrative neuroscience, a clinical track, a cognitive science track, and also a social and health psychology track. But the particular thing that I'm most familiar with is our Center for Inclusive Education, which all Stony Brook scholars, regardless of discipline, can kind of apply to become scholars within our community. And we offer several kind of social supports, financial supports, and just community supports that I would be happy to describe in addition to the psychology program. And as I said, doing my own PhD at Stony Brook and then leaving and then coming back, I also have some kind of unique perspectives about the area and the community. So I'm happy to talk about that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Marie James. I'm the Associate Dean for Diversity at Emory University's Laney Graduate School. So that includes all the academic master's and PhD programs. My field is actually pharmacology, but I'm also in charge of all of our outreach programs for the graduate school. I also do all the recruitment for the graduate school. So there's not one program probably can tell you a lot about, but some great things to know about Emory is that we're fully funded for our PhD programs. And we have PhD programs related to psychology, both clinical, cognitive, neuroscience, integrative neuroscience. Probably two great things to know about us as you think about graduate schools. We share a driveway with the CDC. So that's always a cool thing when you think about how your work will have implications in the future. And then the other great thing is that we have a primate institute on our campus too, which we're one of the few in the Southeast. So,
Wow,
thank you.
Interesting. Yes, thank you. And next.
Hello, I'm Dr. Ty Stafford, and I was trying to turn my phone on silent and hit the wrong button just then. So, I am an assistant professor at Mississippi State University's clinical psychology program, and I'm stepping into the director of training role in about a month. On August 15th, I'll be the director of clinical training. And as you can see from the fact that I have a PhD in counseling psychology, but I'm the DCT of a clinical psychology program, my path in psychology has also been somewhat circuitous. But I fell in love with psychology as an undergrad at a junior college, taking an intro to psychology course, and just have kind of followed that path along since then. I originally went into a master's in counseling program, thinking that I was going to be primarily a practitioner in the therapy room, and do love that, and did that for many years after getting my psychology degree as well. But then found that I really wanted to make even more of an impact, which is being in Mississippi and specializing in LGBT care seemed to be like a very important part of what I needed to do. So moved over to the faculty side of thing to focus both on training and policymaking. So my especially clinical and research areas that I am interested in are LGBT issues, particularly trans issues. And I also love supervision. And so doing clinical supervision in our clinic and in our external practice settings and things like that.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And then we have two additional panelists that I'm going to ask to step up to the table to introduce themselves to you. They're a little off camera because we didn't have as much room at the table. But if we want to have Dr. Erica Shirley come up and join us. These are actually two psychologists that work here in different roles here with us at the National Institutes of Health.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. And also I do work here at NIH in the Office of OITE. I work with Dr. Taborn. I'm one of the well-being advisors. I'm a clinical psychologist, and my pathway to psychology also wasn't that linear. I did major in psychology in undergrad and became quite interested in psychology from professors that I took, et cetera. But I thought that I wanted to go into marketing. And so I worked for an advertising agency for a little bit in New York and realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do, that I wanted to return to psychology, which I did. And prior to coming to OITE, I've spent most of my career in university counseling centers. So I was the director of training at Howard University's counseling service, as well as a staff psychologist. And also prior to that, I was at Georgetown as a staff psychologist and their trauma specialist within the University Counseling Center. So as everyone has said, it's a wonderful field. I think that being a psychologist has really expanded my humanity in so many ways. And I feel very passionate about it. So very interested to talk to people about the field.
Thank you. Thank you. And then we have Dr. Audrey Thurm. I'd like to have her come and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. I am a child clinical psychology program that specialized in child, but the license is for all. And my route started, I actually majored in human development and knew that I wanted to study young children and children with disabilities, and specifically very curious about genetics then. And boy, oh boy, am I glad that I was, because that has really blossomed into a field, and really couldn't decide between medicine route and psychology, and chose psychology because it's an area where you actually do spend more time with the children and families. You are able to spend more time. You're able to focus on diagnosis, and write longer reports and really dig in a lot more. And that was a major reason why I chose it. And I'm a very proud graduate of DePaul University in Chicago. And I do want to also emphasize that when you go to a program, oftentimes there are multiple programs that people have mentioned, and I was really lucky that mine had a child specialization. I didn't really know what community psychology was, but it also had a specialization in that. So I always want to bring it up here because it is sort of, an under talked about area of psychology. But I benefited tremendously from the classes and students who were studying that, and exposure to that, especially in the city of Chicago. So I'm happy to answer questions about that field too. And then I was able to utilize these skills in a field where I have always been able to really, truly conduct clinical research, where the idea here is that we're conducting research, and we're really at the forefront with a lot of genetic conditions that we're seeing here, but we're also providing clinically meaningful data and information for families as they come through research studies. And I'm happy to answer questions about that later too.
Okay. Wow, let's give a round of applause for our panelists one more time. I get very excited the reason why I like to ask that first question is because there's a lot of different ways that psychologists work, and a lot of different routes and hopefully those of you who are in the audience and those of you who are listening online can start hearing some of the pathways and questions you might be having, and different routes in, and also how science, whether it's genetics or or neuroscience or whatever, is kind of molding into this field, and it's different ways to go, and then different career paths and different educational paths. So as you're listening, you might have some questions or be thinking about, oh, this might be a possibility for me. So the next question I would ask, and this is probably going to be for some of the people that are representing programs, but I think one of the questions that usually when I'm working with trainees here as one of the career counselors, we have educational advisors, meaning we're advising you here at NIH on your application process to medical school, PhD programs in clinical psych or counseling psych or whatever graduate program you're interested in. But if you can just say a little bit about what are some of the key, I'm going to call it qualifications that you're looking for when students are applying to, I'm going to say graduate programs, so I'm going to say PhD programs in your psychology programs, and also how much is the importance of research and research and clinical experience before you apply, and what you're looking for with that. I think that might be helpful. And we can start with maybe perhaps Dr. Davies at the end, O'Kine Davies, or whoever would like to go ahead and start. But
Sure. I would certainly say that to be a competitive applicant for psychology programs, particularly at Howard University, having a clear research agenda would be really important. So being able to define kind of what populations, think ahead of time, what populations you want to work with. If there's a specific setting, think about, do I want to work in school, criminal justice system, and really think about beginning with the end in mind. Where do you want to see yourself end up? Have a clear research agenda that you're articulating. And then the idea of really captivating the audience with an understanding of your research experiences, but more than just a documentation of what your research experiences have been, what you've gained from them, right? I think for students that are coming in with a master's degree, there would be an expectation at Howard that you would have some clinical experience under your belt, having observed a clinician, or having some observation hours under your belt. But if you're coming from undergrad, obviously a strong academic record, at least a 3.0 GPA, particularly in the psychology area, psychology courses that you've taken at the undergrad level. But definitely articulating for the committee what makes you, I always say this to students, a low risk investment. And the way to do that is to demonstrate past success in your research experiences and how you weather the storms of the research experiences. Part of what you gain from research experiences isn't necessarily everything went well, right? But how did you pivot as part of your research experience? Because you'll be expected to do that at the graduate level in grad school. So you want to convince the committee that you have what it takes to do graduate level work.
okay. Yes, whoever would like to go next. Would you like to go next?
Sure, I can.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I was just gonna echo everything. I mean, that really was spot on for at least my experience at Mississippi State and what we look for in our applicants. I would add that one thing that really helps an applicant stand out is those letters of reference. If you have a really strong letter from someone who can speak not just to who you are as a person, but also your research qualifications or how you were in a classroom, things like that, things that really point to not only is this someone that we think is ready for the rigor nature of a graduate level program, but also someone that we can stand to be around for 4 years or something like that. Those things really help a lot. And I think when looking at narrowing down what your research interests are and things like that, identifying, at least in our program, identifying specific labs that you're interested in working with, specific professors that you're interested in working with because of what they're doing. We really like to see someone who wants to be at Mississippi State, not necessarily someone who's just looking for a graduate program. And so that is something that really helps draw in like, oh, this person, they're actually really excited about the work that Dr. Dozier's doing or Dr. Lancaster's doing. And so those are things that really draw us to an applicant in addition to what was already said.
I'll just add, so I went to a PhD program, but I actually am currently at a PsyD program. For those of you who may not be aware of the differences, it's still a doctoral program in clinical psychology. But the emphasis, it follows a different model. It's a practitioner scholar model. So it's really more focused on the application of scholarly knowledge to clinical work. So our program is a little bit more clinically focused than some of the programs that other people here are representing. And so for us, we really like to see research experience, but we are probably a little bit more focused on strong academic background and clinical experience. I'll also reinforce that letters of recommendation from someone who knows you well and can really speak to your skills are really important. Strongly written essays, kind of a clearer path of where you want to head in the future, what populations you might want to work with, the type of work you want to do. But for PsyD programs, the research piece is probably a little bit less of a focus than the clinical piece and making sure you have clinical experience.
So when you say clinical experience, just a little, can you give the audience a little bit of a description of what clinical experience means for you? Mhm.
Sure, it
And how
can
they might
be
get it,
any
yeah.
number of things. It can be working in a group home, it can be working in a psychiatric hospital, it can be shadowing someone in their clinical practice, it can be working on a hotline. There's kind of a lot of ways to get
Okay.
that experience, but certainly having that experience is important because you're making a commitment to a program that's, you know, a big investment, both in, you know, in terms of your time and your finances. And so we really want to make sure that this is something you want to do. And sometimes we have people applying who really have very little clinical experience, and we are not convinced that, you know, you want to do this for your career when you haven't had that experience first.
Thank you.
I want to also add, something that we talk about often is thinking about your application like a portfolio. And so every part of your application is important, the letters, the essays, your transcript. And if there's parts in it that don't seem perfect, acknowledging it as part of something that you went through and that you've come through. So talk about your grit and resiliency, that I didn't get a great grade my first semester of sophomore year. I was going through something, but this is how I recovered and this is what I learned from it. No matter what, we're all having those moments in our lives that things don't look perfect. So make sure you really highlight how you've gotten through it, not just that you had them. And then the other thing that's really, really important to us is making sure that, I think he said it too, that Emory's the place you'd want to be. So if you talk about working with a population that is not common to the state of Georgia or the city of Atlanta, and that's the one population you want to work with, then no matter how good your application would look, we probably wouldn't get accepted because we don't have access to that group of individuals that would help you bring your research forward. So thinking about the university as a whole is really important too.
I would just add to the other panelists, and I'll speak specifically for our program at Howard. There's a couple of things that I think are important for students to really identify. And that is really the model of the program. So it really does make a difference if you're applying to a scholar practitioner department or a practitioner scholar. At Howard, we are a scholar practitioner. So our emphasis is on research. So in terms of the applications, we are looking for students who have had research at the level of undergrad, so that you have integrated some form of research, whether you're looking at articles for a professor or a lab, and that you're able to explain that in your application to our site. Now, the clinical acumen is also our focus, but research is a priority. So that's what we're looking at. And I would say the second thing with our the second major aspect of our program is we are very social justice focused. And I really do think, I can't say that enough, to know exactly why you're going to that particular program. So there's been a couple of times where students say, I just want to get into a clinical psych program. And then you say, okay, well, why are you applying to Howard? And they can't answer that question. So I would say, you know, as you go out in the cycle, be very clear in your mind why it is you're applying to clinical psych or counseling psych or school psych or whatever, and why it is you're applying to that specific institution.
I think I'll just say
Right.
that was a wealth of information. And one thing that I think can help maybe identify a school that's a good fit for you is what other resources might support your scholarship. So one thing that I think Stony Brook has recently in the past 10 years really put a lot of money into is supercomputing. So maybe want to go through some hard scholarship with big data sets. So if you want to tie in some of the resources that are at your specific institutes that you're applying to, so that you're going to be contributing to the broader community of the university. You're going to, of course, fulfill the requirements for the department and for the application, but what will you bring to the broader community, I think can also help kind of bring your application above the rest, if you can speak to that.
Okay, I'd like to ask just one other question. It's related to what we're talking about. It has to do with research. Like we talked about what would be evidence of someone having, the importance of someone having experience with research. I mean, with clinical experience. How does the doctoral program or faculty look at research? Like what kind of things would you like to see in terms of not only research, but subject area skills, the amount of how would you know that this is a really strong candidate for a PhD program that's like clinically or research based? Yeah. Like scientific practitioner. Yeah.
So just going through our last cycle, I can give you some specific examples of really what stood out for us with students. So we each have labs. There's 7 full-time faculty in the clinical area in our program, and each of us has a lab and several graduate students and undergraduate students. And some of the major activities that we involve our undergraduates in are, looking for articles, being really a part of the research process, being on presentations, being on poster presentations, paper presentations, anything in which you have contributed to the development of that lab would show us that at least you have some sort of motivation to continue research, and you have some skills that you're going to be carrying through in our program. And so those are the kinds of things that we would tend to look at and value.
Okay, thank you.
I would add that's very similar for us as well. And things that really stand out are kind of where the authorship is on those things too, especially for an undergrad. If you're first author on some poster presentations and things like that, especially if they're larger conferences, that's showing that you've been a real contributing member to a lab. You've done a lot. Obviously for publications and things like that, that's going to potentially be harder for you to have on a first author. But if you're on the author list, certainly that's something, if you have some publications and things. Now, not having a publication, not having a lot of posters, that's not necessarily like, oh, you haven't reached our bar. But those are definitely things that are easy things for us to point to when we're reviewing a CV or something that says, obviously this person has got some experience with this. That letter of reference, if it's from someone with a research lab that can speak to, you've been in the lab, you've been doing this research, maybe you don't have a poster, but you were part of this publication, that kind of thing, that really helps too. It points us to something very specific that we can say, this is someone that has done this. If you're coming in, if you're applying with a master's, especially if it's a master's that's in like psychology or some related kind of field, we're probably expecting a little bit more on that. Maybe it's a thesis that you've done as part of that master's program, or you're definitely gotten some publications and things like that. We're kind of expecting that you've done a lot more related to research because of that. Again, depending on the master's program, some master's programs are not going to necessarily be focused on that, but those are things we look at too. I will say to stick to the letter of reference for just a second too. If you've been in someone's research lab and it's a lab of like 300 people and they know your name, but they don't know you and things like that, it might actually be better for you to have a letter from someone that can speak much more directly about your qualifications as a student or as a researcher or things like that, than to have some big name say, I know this person exists. That can be something to really balance when you're thinking about letter writers and things too.
Okay, I'm going to ask a couple more questions of the panelists, and then we'll go to audience questions. So start thinking of your questions, and we'll alternate between audience questions in the room and who's online as well. I do have a question because this comes up a lot when I'm working with trainees. They're thinking a lot about research because at NIH for a lot of post-bacs, they've already graduated and they're doing a lot of research. But when they start talking about what's the clinical training about, they kind of don't know what the clinical training is in the graduate program and then like afterwards, like when they do their AP accredited internship or something like that. So for some of you that are in programs, you could talk about what the training looks like in the program, and then maybe we'll have Dr. Shirley talk to us a little bit, or someone talks about from the training standpoint from an actual internship program. Anyone want to say a little bit about clinical training?
So at Emory, they have an opportunity to do 3 kind of rotations, almost like you think when you're in some of the scientific labs and you go to different labs for a little bit of time. We're lucky enough to have different hospitals and institutions on campus, so you get to pick 3. So either a children's hospital, a veterans hospital, main hospital, rehabilitation hospital, and you do that for 6 weeks, and you're really just kind of shadowing. And then that's where you write up your discussion section of what you've done, and then we bring it to our committee, who helps you then pick your internship. And so it comes from that, relating to both your research and what you had done in those 6-week rotation kind of things.
So in our program, we have 3 required years of practicum training. Being in the DC area, there's just a wealth of opportunities. We have over 100 sites and they run the gamut. There are university counseling centers and mental or psychiatric institutions, medical hospitals, private practices, schools. And so you really have those 3 years where you can get a wealth of various experiences working with children or adults or families or a combination. And that really prepares you to then apply for your internship year, which is a full-time kind of pinnacle clinical training experience in clinical psychology programs.
Anyone else? Yeah. Mhm.
Well, at Mississippi State, it's very similar. We require in our very first semester, we have students in our training clinic. They're usually they are paired with an advanced student who's helping them with like just getting, how do you work our internal medical system documentation? How do you answer the phone appropriately? That kind of thing. So that when you get into your second year, you can hit the ground running on actually seeing clients, and we have a good sense of you're ready for that. We do a full year within our internal training clinic that focuses on, we are actually one of the largest providers of mental health services, not just in the Starkville area, but in the North Mississippi area, because that says more about the other services that are available in Mississippi than it does about us, honestly, but we actually provide a ton of services for our area. And then in your third year, you go to an external prac, and we have external pracs at our local Air Force Base, in VAs, in hospitals, in our veterinary medicine college. If you're interested in doing direct services while someone is actively performing surgery on a dog, we can give you that experience to help manage anxiety, since there is no accommodation we can give that makes you have more time on giving a surgery or things like that. So we actually have some intervention right there in the moment. So I'm really proud of all of that we do. And then we have a full semester of preparation for internship as well, where we go through all the application process. I'm a former internship director myself as well. So I'd like to bring in that perspective.
So at Howard, I would say we are pretty balanced with our clinical program. So in our first, you are a 4-year resident in our program. That means you stay, if you are a traditional student, barring any sort of exceptionalities, you would be 4 years in our program. And then your 5th year is a pre-doctoral internship in which you would apply nationally, like most programs that are APA affiliated and not. So the first year, we use that year where it's mostly course intensive, a lot of research intensive, but it's also, we make use of the simulation center that Howard has. It's really a wonderful thing that's at our institution. The dentistry school uses it, the medical school, and we do as well. And so we practice a lot on standardized patients, which helps to quell a little bit of your anxiety, you know, sometimes when you're dealing with patients for the first time. And so we make use of that, the simulation center, all through the year, and actually mostly through your 4 years at Howard. For your 2nd through 4th years, you're then expected to be at an externship or a practicum site for the full year, which includes sometimes the summer. And because Howard is part of the DMV consortium, that does cover over 100 programs in the area, and just a little bit outside that. We have a lot of our students, for example, go to St. Elizabeth's Hospital and do neuropsych evaluations or psychotherapy in terms of group and individual. Lots of exposure at Children's National Hospital and other hospitals. So we have a really vast array of experiences that you can make use of. And then you would expect it to go on internship in your 5th year.
Wow, very exciting. So as you've been hearing them talk a little bit about the internship year that you're preparing for while you're in a psych PhD program. And I think that was really important because a lot of trainees, when they're getting ready to apply, are thinking that they're only going to be doing research and then they'll get their clinical training, you know, during their AP accredited internship year. But what you're hearing today is really interesting ways that you're developing all along. Dr. Shi, would you like to talk a little bit about what it's like to be in the internship here, just so you all can have like a foresight to what you might be planning for? Yeah. I'm gonna step aside here.
Sure. So when I introduced myself, I said that I used to be at Howard University's Counseling Center. I used to be the director of training for the internship program. And as it was described here, that's sort of a deep dive into clinical practice for 12 months, for 1 year, prior to you completing your doctorate in either counseling or clinical psychology. And it's similar to, for example, a medical student matching for residency, except it's a little bit different in terms of the logistics. But as Dr. Dillmore said, you can apply nationally to any, various institutions, hospitals, university counseling centers, private practices, et cetera. And you are then sort of developing your interests and your practice and your clinical skills within that year's time before you actually get your doctorate degree. So I think it's really important when you do enter into a clinical or counseling psych program, to really get a lot of varied experience clinically if you can, depending on what the program offers, because you'll be kind of basically thinking about what are my interests? What do I find that I'm, what are my strengths clinically? What populations do I find that I really feel very aligned with, or that I feel like are of interest to me? So that would be a way in which you might be thinking about then the kind of internship program that you would want to apply to.
And I think yeah, go ahead. Come on up. Mhm.
At this point, I want to make a plug for what's happening at NIH, which is after many, many years, we were able to finally establish a practicum program here, which we are really, really excited about. Now that you know what a practicum is, it's having students in clinical psych programs get clinical exposure. And so now we have actually 5 different sites at different labs or services that are part of NIH. So students that are part of programs in the DMV can apply and spend a year here as a practicum student. So those are people that you might want to talk to because they're here on campus, and they would be great people to talk to. In addition to that, because we know that clinical exposure is hard to come by here at NIH. The research is heavy, but the clinical is less. We created a practicum seminar series. It's once a month lectures that are for the practicum students, but are open to everybody. And so we highly encourage IRTAs to engage with this. We actually, in addition to having them, they're online. And so I do think it would be appealing in your application to say that you listen to or were part of these. They're all very clinically focused, practicum focused seminars. So I can give anybody information how to access the ones that happened this past year and then going forward to be able to come and engage in them.
I was just thinking to myself, wow, this is such an exciting career and all kinds of training. I do want to give a few minutes time to answer some questions that you all might have. Thanks again to our panelists for sharing all of your experiences and background and all the different exciting ways. We do have a question while you all are here in the audience or in person are thinking of a couple of questions. We do have a question online that I'm going to ask my colleague to read.
Hi, I'm Emily Somerville. I'm part of OITE. We have a question online that says, can you speak a little bit about programs that are non-clinical and more research-based? What makes a strong candidate? Where did the alumni from these programs go? And what do they do after completing the program? And if you have questions in the audience here, I'll bring the mic to you.
Does anybody have a comment about that? I'm assuming what they're saying is they might not want to be a clinician.
Yes,
but
they do not want to be a
practice. Yeah,
clinician.
do
They want
more
to stay on the research side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say Howard has a number of specializations. I think there are about 5 of them. So there's developmental, there's some school-based psychology, there's social psych. So really thinking about, again, beginning with the end in mind and thinking about where you want to be. even thinking about whether if you want to go into academia, whether you want to be at an R1 or R2 research active intensive university, right? So that means you want to have a lot of research under your belt. And so you want to think about that career pathway that you might potentially end up in, and the best program to prepare you for that career path, right? So for the more research intensive programs, I would say highlighting your research experiences again. One place that you want to really hone in on your research experience, obviously, is in your statement of purpose. It's best to get clear on research questions that you're curious about. I always say for the statement of purpose, one way to grab your reader's attention, think about it this way. You have faculty that you've identified that you might like to work with. Pretend that you're talking to those faculty as you're writing your statement of purpose, and begin to think about research questions that have piqued your interest over time, something that you're curious about solving. Maybe there's a statistic that is just jarring to you, and you're like, I want to figure this out. We need to figure this out. Start with kind of the place where you were. Think about that. And what excited you about the research, that research inquiry into those areas or questions, and do like a little bit of a literature review. I would say Google Scholar is your best friend. It's a great tool that allows you to see what literature reviews what systematic and literature reviews might already be out there about the questions, the types of questions that you're asking, and identifying that research gap will come out of that critical work. You'll be able to say, okay, these are some of the main questions that I see are being researched in terms of the land within the field, right? But this is where I see a segue. This is where I see an opening for some deep, intensive work that I think needs to be done to address the type of questions that I'd like to address in a new and exciting way, because that's ultimately the goal of a PhD. People say you're creating new knowledge, but really you're building on the work that others have done and creating new openings to answer new questions. So highlighting that is a good thing for your statements of purpose.
Is anybody else? Okay, do we have any questions? Thank you for that good question. Do we have any questions within the room? Anybody has any questions? Yes.
So you mentioned highlighting the gaps in the literature and where you want to fill that in. Would you say to go so far as to offer up your hypothesis, or not? Kind of keep it a little bit more broad.
That's a great question. So I would say keep it broad. I think one strategy that I share with students is start with kind of 2 disciplinary fields, then go into sub fields within that. So you've identified kind of 4 topical areas that you might be interested in, and then think about research questions within that, right? And then start to do the review and kind of see what's out there in those areas. And then start to look at institutions and identify faculty whose work, like look up their research, investigate. Part of the PhD is your exposure to building muscle around what it means to do real critical writing, engage in the research process. So I think a lot of committees know that you're not coming in knowing exactly what the full gap in the research is. Like that's part of the process of the PhD, frankly speaking, but the excitement about research inquiry, right? Again, that notion that as you're writing out your research experiences, it isn't just, this is what I did, this is how I was involved, look at all this proof that I've done the work. It's, what did you gain from it? If you were in a social psychology lab, you ran experiments, what was perplexing about the experiments that you ran? What were some new interventions that you discovered in terms of talking to the folks that you were engaging in the intervention, right? Were there new methodologies? Are there faculty whose work you're like, wow, I think I could extend this work by way of, I have this kind of research experience under my belt. I think I could help them in their lab do A, B, and C. There's nothing more exciting than knowing a student is excited about your work, but can see synergies between their interest in your work and how they might extend it.
Other questions in the room?
So you mentioned that for people that are coming in with a master's, for example, you might be looking for different things than someone that came in as an undergrad. But I'm wondering if someone comes in as a postbac with like a year or two between their undergrad and applying to grad school, are there specific things that you would be looking for during that time after graduating? And how would that weigh against what they did in their undergrad when you consider their applications?
I would answer absolutely. There are different things we're looking at for that. Like, for instance, we're not necessarily expecting that you've done a lot of research in that time. Now, if you've been in a post-bac position like here, that may be the case. But if you've been, like, say, a case manager working in, you know, a children's home or something like that, obviously that's not an opportunity you would have had much had. It's more about how you talk about what that year, 2 years, 3 years or more has taught you about the field or what you want to do, how you're going to bring that experience into what you're going to do clinically or research or all in the work that you're going to do. So it's really, it's less about like checking these boxes that they have definitely done this and this and this, but more about this experience I had working in a children's home showed me that we don't have an answer for how to treat this. And that's something I'm really interested in knowing more about. I found that in order for me to get those answers, I need to be in a PhD program, and I need to be in your PhD program because that's the work you're doing. That's really what it's not, I hate to use the word spin because spin sounds negative, but it's definitely talking about how that time that you've had informs why you need to take this next step and why you need to take it with us.
I would add that goes back to the idea of thinking of your application like a portfolio and really setting yourself up to talk about yourself as a whole person. And so why you did a post-bac or took a few years off and what you did during that time, and making sure that those letters again still speak to who you are now and not maybe who you were 3 or 4 years ago if there's a gap between your academic experiences.
I'm going to speak for me personally in terms of what I look for in my lab. I think it's wonderful if you do a post-bac for 1, 2, or 3 years, but what I'm looking for is that you've made the most of that time. So it's okay if you're doing other part-time work that's not related to psychology, but I would expect if you're going to be applying to my lab, which is heavily research-based, you know, we're looking at, it's pretty immediate, our work. I mean, everybody's work is pretty immediate, but I want you coming in and start running. What matters to me is not that you have a 4.0. I mean, I expect that you're doing well in your work, but that you're hugely motivated, because that is what's going to carry you through graduate school. That's what's going to carry you through the struggles that everybody has in graduate school. That's what matters most to me in my lab, because that's what progresses us through our work. So that's what specifically I look for. I think post-bac is an amazing thing. It's just make the most of that time for yourself.
There's another question from online. Could you speak about the range of jobs that a person with a clinical psychology PhD can do versus a master's of social work?
There's quite a few. Maybe if we just talk about a couple of similarities in different pathways, maybe that might be one.
Well, yeah, I would say probably the biggest is the PhD opens doors. It just really does. I mean, it takes more time, it takes more money, it takes more effort, but having that PhD there's that much more opportunity because that degree means something, especially if it's coming from an accredited program. And so that's not to say anything negative about Master of Social Work. There's a fantastic path to go, but additionally, often that is someone who's going to be focused primarily as a practitioner working the field, where one of the things I loved and why I sought a PhD was I like the flexibility to be able to be in a lot of different settings. I've had both that choice and that necessity throughout my life to be in many settings. And so I can be a practitioner, I can be a training director, I can be a faculty member. All of those are things that I think are a lot easier with the PhD beyond than if I was to have stayed with my master's in counseling.
Yes. Did you want to add something? Yeah, come on.
Thanks. I just wanted to add just something very detailed and technical. So if you are interested, and you might find this out more if you're in a clinical psych program or even counseling psych program, you might find that you're interested in testing. So psychological evaluations, neuropsychological evaluations, only psychologists can do that kind of testing. So that's something to consider if you are really interested, for example, in assessment. So neuropsych assessments, clinical psychology assessments. It's very unique to psychologists.
Yeah, so going on what you said, so can a counselor, can a counselor or counseling psychology, someone with a counseling psychology PhD, can they do diagnoses, like neuropsychological diagnoses, or only a clinical psychologist can do that?
Both counseling psychologists and clinical psychologists can do psychological assessments, where you're assessing for, various diagnoses. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. I do think that now I came from a clinical psych program, so maybe Dr. Taborn can speak more to the counseling psych program.
Mhm.
I think clinical psych programs may have a little bit more focus on assessment, on psychological assessment than counseling psych programs, but Dr. Taborn may be able
Mhm.
to speak more to that.
Or anyone else that might want to speak to it too. What I would say is it could, oh, and Dr. Thurm, did you want to say something? Oh, I was just going to say that in some counseling psych programs, you might be using some kind of assessments, but also be where you're specializing doing your internships,
Yeah.
where you're getting more, it's not only classroom, it's, are you being supervised by someone that's doing neuropsychological or kind of assessments or things like that. And where it's in your internship and also postdoc internship, it's the supervision and training you get in it, but you would have the similar kind of degree and with that licensure to do so. And it's like Dr. Thurm might have had something to say. Mhm. Yeah. Oh, okay. Stand up here. Yeah.
There's also within clinical psychology, a subspecialty of neuropsychology. And now, in addition to grad school getting licensed, there's also board certification, which is something that you can pursue. And there are definitely, it is getting into the weeds of potentially reimbursement and things like that for some things, pursuing all the way through with neuropsychology to board certification is an avenue you can take within assessment, and that is definitely a subspecialty of clinical psychology.
I'll just add one thing that can help you when you're looking at kind of what specialty to go into and things. You want to pay attention to things like accreditation and things like that.
Mhm.
There are, especially if you're going to be a practitioner that's looking at getting licensed, that APA accreditation or a similar accreditation in Canada is something that you're really going to want to pay attention to, because there are some states that you just cannot get licensed if you didn't do that, or it's significantly more difficult. And that also helps inform, that there are specific things that program has done to get that accreditation. Programs are idiosyncratic in the way in which APA doesn't give a whole lot of really direct guidance on how they have to meet those competencies. And so paying attention to what it is in the program that you are drawn to is going to be really key in that as well. There are counseling psych programs that are very research focused, and there are clinical psych programs that are very practice focused. And of course, then you have the PsyD side of both clinical and counseling as well. And so all of that is not, it would be a lot easier if it was a lot clearer, and it's not necessarily. But this was said, and I want to add it to my answer earlier about the difference between like a master's level clinician and a PhD. Money matters in that too. You are much more likely to get paid more and reimbursed more if you're in a private practice or something like that with that PhD.
So we have time. Thank you very much. We have time for one more question. It looks like it'll be online.
Unless there's anyone in the room with a question.
So my second year postbac ends in January, and I have 8 months until the graduate school starts. And I was curious what your recommendations are to fill those 8 months. I do have a hypothesis and I want to test it. And so I was thinking about emailing some professors who are doing something similar and proposing my idea to kind of flesh out that idea in 8 months. What are your thoughts about that?
You would have already applied, right? So think about it. If you're applying to come start any of our programs, most of our applications are going to be due December 1. So you could be talking about it at your interview process, but you probably wouldn't have been that far into it. So thinking holistically, what else you might need to sharpen up on would be things to consider. For us at Emory, one of the things we find our students really wish they had a little bit more before they walked in through the door is stats. So if you can take an extra stat class anywhere in your world, anywhere in your life, take it. Even if you don't think you're going to love it, stats is important. It's becoming more important. And depending on where you did your undergrad or your master's, you might not have taken enough of it. You took enough, of course, to pass and graduate, but more stats is better than no stats.
So your recommendation would be to get courses under my belt rather than try to get experience in the field, like contributing to like a work experience?
I'll let others jump in. I'm not saying to not do that. I just want you to think holistically because it's not going to increase your likelihood of getting in because your application's already been reviewed starting in December.
And we're gonna do the last question and
Yeah,
we'll wrap.
last
Mhm.
one. So what stands out the most to you in an applicant's personal statement? So how do you
Mhm.
write a strong
That's a good
personal
one.
statement?
Mhm.
A clear understanding of who they are, why they want to go into that program, and what it will add to their personal well-being, but the well-being of the field and whatever community they're planning to work with. So clear understanding of that. And why, again, you didn't just go get this other degree or get it from another place, why Emory, or whatever university you're applying to is a place you need to be doing this kind of work.
Anybody else?
Um,
Mhm.
I would say a clear articulation of the best fit, right? So that you've really customized as part of that portfolio, you've customized to the institution and to that particular program. No more than 2 to 3 faculty, I would say identify and just like name drop. I would say reach out to those faculty in advance if you can, so that when your application comes, they maybe have a name already. But the thing that stands out the most is like, it's clear that no other institution, you couldn't replace the institution's name with another. They have done the work and the research of understanding what we have to offer and what they have to offer as well. Because you want something out of the experience. You're spending 5 to 7 years in a PhD. You want it to be the community you want to be in, the environment, and that people would be engaged in the work that you're hoping to engage in.
I might be really aging
Go
myself
ahead.
here, but I would say that what I look for in an application, particularly a personal statement, is that you come in humble. I think that, and that hopefully carries through you as a professional. I always have questions and I'm never the expert in the room because there's always something that I don't know. And so I feel that that's really important that students are coming in saying, look, I know this stuff. I've learned, I've gained some skills. I know some of this stuff from undergrad, and yet there's a whole other thing that I don't know, but I want to.
Oh. Well,
It's a sign.
okay, well, that's, yeah.
That might be the end.
Okay, let's give our audience a round of applause and our panelists. And I guess what I would do is hold on so we can figure out how to safely. We have to figure out how to safely leave the room, but it seems kind of dark. So if you hold on a second, hopefully someone from the space will tell us how to exit and if it's safe to.
And thank you for your.
Well,
patience.
never a dull moment. Thank you, everybody, for coming. If you can see your way.